The first thing Sophia Miller noticed about the man was his hands. Not his torn jacket, not the dried mud on his boots, not the way he sat slumped against the wall outside Carver's Diner on a Tuesday morning while the Miami sun had barely finished rising. She noticed his hands, thick-knuckled, steady, and strangely clean for a man who looked like he'd spent the night on the street. But she didn't have time to think about hands, because at that exact moment, Derek Carver, the diner owner, the man who had fired Sophia 6 months ago over a tip dispute, was standing over the homeless man with a bucket of mop water. "I'm going to count to 3, Derek said loudly, loud enough for the breakfast crowd inside to hear through the glass. "And if you're not off my sidewalk, I swear to God—" "Don't." Sophia stepped between them before her brain finished telling her legs to stop. The water sloshed in the bucket. Derek's face went red. "This isn't your business, Sophia. You're about to pour dirty water on a human being in front of 20 people, she said. Her voice didn't shake. It never shook when she was angry. "So yeah, it is." The man on the ground hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't even looked up. He just sat there with his forearms resting on his knees, staring at the concrete between his shoes. And there was something about the absolute stillness of him, like a man who had decided long ago that he would never beg for anything, that made Sophia's chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain.
She reached into her apron. She was working the morning shift at Rosa's Cafe 3 blocks down, and pulled out the $20 bill she'd been saving for groceries. She crouched down in front of the man and held it out. "There's a place called Sunshine Kitchen on 5th, she said quietly. "They'll give you a hot breakfast and let you clean up. Tell them Sophia sent you." For the first time, the man looked up. His eyes were dark, so dark they were almost black. And they weren't the eyes of a man who was lost or broken or desperate. They were the eyes of a man who was watching, calculating, taking in every detail of her face, the way a general studies a battlefield map. He looked at the $20, then back at her. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and even, with the faintest trace of an accent she couldn't place. Colombian, maybe? Or Venezuelan? He took the bill. Sophia stood up, turned back to Derek, and said, "You should be ashamed of yourself," before walking back towards Rosa's without looking back. She didn't see the man on the ground reach into the torn jacket and press 2 fingers to the side of his jaw, the signal he hadn't used in over a year. She didn't see the black SUV that had been idling at the end of the block slowly pull forward. She didn't know that the man she had just given her last $20 to was Carlos Vega, and she had absolutely no idea what that name meant. Carlos Vega had not eaten street food in 11 years. He sat inside the black SUV now, the torn jacket discarded on the seat beside him, a glass of water in one hand and his phone in the other. His head of security, a man named Marco who had once snapped a man's wrist for reaching too close to Carlos in a hotel lobby, sat in the driver's seat without saying a word.
He knew better than to ask questions when Carlos came back from one of his disappearing acts. Carlos had been doing it for 3 years, vanishing for a day or 2 at a time, shedding everything that marked him as what he was, and walking through the city he controlled as an invisible man. It was the only way he knew how to think clearly, the only way to remember what the world actually looked like from the ground. He hadn't expected anyone to notice him this morning. People never did. They looked past homeless men the same way they looked past fire hydrants. But she had noticed. He turned the $20 bill over in his fingers. It was soft at the edges from being folded and unfolded many times, the kind of soft that meant someone had held on to it for a while, needed it. She'd given it away anyway.
"Find out who she is," Carlos said. Marco's eyes moved to the rearview mirror. "The woman from the diner?" The woman from the diner. Her name was Sophia Miller, 27 years old, waitress at Rosa's Cafe, previously employed at 3 other restaurants, 2 of which had closed, rented a studio apartment on Meridian Avenue. No car, no savings account with more than $300 in it. One older brother named James who lived in Atlanta. Mother deceased, father unknown, as in he had chosen to be. Carlos read the file Marco had assembled by noon and felt something shift in his chest that he immediately pushed back down.
She had a record. Minor. A disorderly conduct charge from 4 years ago. She had apparently thrown a customer's belongings into a parking lot after he'd grabbed a coworker. The charge had been dropped. He almost smiled at that. Almost. He set the file down on his desk. The real desk. The one in the penthouse of the Vega Tower on Brickell Avenue, 62 floors above the city he had built his empire in, and stared at the skyline. Carlos Lega had come to Miami at 19, with nothing but the name of a man his father had told him to find. He had found the man. He had learned what the man knew. And then, by the time he was 25, he had become something that man could have never imagined. He controlled the waterfront, the import routes, 3 legitimate hotel chains that laundered nothing because Carlos had decided long ago that mixing dirty money with the things he was proud of was an insult to both. He kept his legal empire completely clean, the other side of his life, the side that kept rivals in line, that negotiated with people who did not understand the word no, that made certain problems disappear before they became catastrophic. That side was invisible. He had a reputation in Miami, not among the socialites and the news anchors and the real estate developers who shook his hand at charity galas, among the people who moved things in the dark. They called him El Silencioso, the silent one, not because he was quiet, though he was, but because you never heard him coming. He had not been in a relationship in 4 years. The last one had ended when he discovered the woman had been feeding information to a rival organization. He hadn't loved her, but the betrayal had calcified something inside him that he wasn't sure he wanted unfrozen.
He picked up the file again. Sophia Miller. The way she had stepped between that man and the bucket, the way her voice hadn't wavered, the way she'd crouched down to his level so he wouldn't have to look up at her like a child. She didn't do it for an audience, he thought. She did it because she couldn't not do it. He put the file in his desk drawer and locked it. Then he opened it again and looked at the name of the cafe, Rosa's, 3 blocks from Carver's Diner. Morning shift. She noticed the man at table 7 on Thursday morning because he ordered black coffee and nothing else, and then sat there for 2 hours reading a newspaper like he owned the building. Most people who sat that long without ordering more were running from something: an argument at home, a bill they couldn't pay, a loneliness so heavy it needed a roof over it. Sophia had learned to read people in 10 years of waitressing the way other people learn to read weather. This man wasn't running from anything. He was expensive without trying to be. His watch was simple, black face, leather strap. No brand she recognized, but her coworker Deja, who knew things like this, would later tell her it was worth more than Sophia's annual salary. His jacket was dark gray and fit the way clothes only fit when they were made for a specific body. He had dark hair, cut short on the sides, and a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who took the concept of structure very seriously. He also looked familiar in a way she couldn't place. She refilled his coffee without being asked. He looked up from the newspaper. "Thank you," he said. Same voice. Low, measured, faint accent. She froze for exactly 1 second. Then her brain made the connection, and she almost dropped the coffee pot. "You," she said. He looked at her with those bottomless, dark eyes and said nothing. "You're the man from Tuesday," Sophia said. Outside Carver's. A pause so brief, most people would have missed it. "You have a good memory. You look," she stopped herself, "different, clean, richer than God. You look better," she finished. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the idea of one. "I clean up well." She wanted to ask 100 questions. She asked none of them. "Can I get you anything else?" "Your name." She blinked. "It's on my name tag." "I know," he said. "I want to hear you say it." It was the most unsettling thing anyone had said to her in years, and not because it was threatening, because it wasn't. It was completely calm and completely direct, and it made her feel for one disorienting moment like she was the most important person in the room. "Sophia," she said. "Carlos," he said. She went back to the counter and told herself her heart rate was elevated because she'd been on her feet since 5 in the morning.
She did not convince herself. He came back on Friday and Saturday and the following Tuesday. Each time, table 7, black coffee, 2 hours. The newspaper, though Sophia noticed he read the same section twice when she was nearby, which meant he wasn't reading at all. On the 4th visit, he left an envelope on the table when he left. Inside was $500 in cash and a note that said, "For the 20 and the dignity. See." Sophia stared at the envelope for a long time. Then she put it in her apron, walked to the back room, and stood very still for a moment. $500 for 20. That wasn't a repayment. That was something else. She thought about sending it back. She thought about it seriously. But her electricity bill was overdue, and her brother James had just called to say he couldn't lend her money this month, and the honest truth was, she needed it. She kept it. But the next time Carlos came in, she put a plate of food in front of him before he could order. "Eggs, toast, coffee," she said. "On me. We're even." He looked at the plate, then at her. "I don't accept charity." "Neither do I," she said. "But I cooked it myself on my break, so technically it's a gift, not charity. And you're going to eat it or I'm going to be offended." Another one of those almost smiles. He picked up the fork. She watched him eat 2 bites before she caught herself watching and went back to her tables. Deja grabbed her arm by the espresso machine and whispered, "Who is that man?" "A customer," Sophia said.
"Sophia, baby, that man is looking at you like you're the only thing in the room worth looking at, and I need you to take that seriously." Sophia looked back at table 7. Carlos was eating his eggs with the focused efficiency of someone who treated meals as tasks to be completed. He did not look up. "He's just a customer," she said again. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't find out how wrong for another 2 weeks, and by then, everything would already be different. The night it changed started with a broken heel. It was a Thursday, late, and Sophia was walking home from a double shift because the buses had stopped running and she couldn't afford an Uber, and her feet hurt in the specific way that meant she would feel it in her lower back by morning. She was 3 blocks from her apartment when the heel of her left shoe snapped clean off on a crack in the sidewalk. She caught herself on a parked car, took the shoe off, looked at it, and laughed. Not a happy laugh, the kind that comes out when crying seems like too much effort. "Sophia." She turned. A black SUV was idling at the curb. The window was down. "Carlos." She stared at him. "Are you following me?" "No." A pause. "I was driving by. At 11:30 at night? I have late meetings." She looked at him. He looked at her. The broken shoe dangled from her hand. "Get in," he said. "I'll take you home. I don't get into cars with men I don't know. You know my name. I know your first name. I don't even know your last name."
Something crossed his face, something complicated, quickly suppressed. "Vega," he said. Carlos Vega. The name meant nothing to her. That, she would later realize, was one of the most significant facts of her life. She got in the car. He didn't talk during the drive. Neither did she. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that sat between 2 people who were both thinking too loudly to speak. When they pulled up in front of her building, a 4-story walk-up with a buzzing light over the entrance that the landlord had been promising to fix for 3 months, Carlos got out before she could reach for the handle. He opened her door. She stepped out barefoot, one shoe in her hand. He looked down at her feet on the sidewalk, and his jaw tightened in a way she noticed, but didn't understand. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride. You shouldn't be walking home alone this late. I do it 3 times a week." His expression did something she couldn't name. "That's going to stop." She tilted her head. "Excuse me? I'll arrange a car for you, after your shifts. You'll—" She stopped. Started again. "Carlos, you don't even know me." "I know you," he said simply, as if that settled it. "You know my name and my coffee order. I know you stepped between a man and a bucket of dirty water when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose," he said. I know you gave away money you needed because someone else needed it more.
I know you work doubles 3 times a week, and you always check on the table by the window first because the old man who sits there is hard of hearing and doesn't like to wave for attention. He paused. I know enough. Sophia didn't say anything for a long moment. The buzzing light above the entrance hummed between them. That's a lot of noticing, she said finally, for someone who's always reading his newspaper. This time, he actually smiled. Small, brief, like sunlight coming through a crack in a wall, but real. Good night, Sophia, he said. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed in her one-room apartment and pressed both hands to her face and tried to organize her thoughts into something that made sense. It didn't work. The car appeared the following Monday morning, black, unmarked, a driver named Felix who was polite and silent and opened doors with the efficiency of someone professionally trained to do so. Sophia told Felix she didn't need him. Felix nodded and drove her to Rose's anyway. She called the number Carlos had texted her. He had texted her, which meant she now had his number, which was a problem she hadn't planned for, and said, I told you I don't accept charity. It's not charity, Carlos said. His voice sounded like he was in a large room. It's a business arrangement. Felix is between assignments. It's more efficient for him to be useful. That doesn't make sense. It makes sense to me. Carlos, you'll be late, he said. Felix drives fast, but not if you don't get in. She got in. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she would figure out a way to pay him back. She told herself this was not the beginning of something, because she was 27 years old, and she had learned that things which felt like beginnings often turned out to be something else entirely. But then he showed up at Rose's that Friday with a split lip and a look on his face that said he expected no one to comment on it, and something inside Sophia bypassed every logical thought she'd had in the past 2 weeks and went straight to concern. She brought him his coffee and a small ice pack wrapped in a dish towel without saying a word. She placed both on the table and started to walk away. Sophia, she turned. Sit down, he said. Please. She sat. And because she was Sophia Miller and had never been good at pretending things weren't happening, she said, Are you okay? Carlos looked at the ice pack. His hands were around the coffee cup. I'm fine. You have a split lip and your knuckles are bruised. Occupational hazard. What's your occupation? Long pause. Import logistics. Right, Sophia said. She looked at him steadily. I'm not going to ask questions you won't answer honestly, but I need you to know that if you show up here hurt again, I'm going to have feelings about it whether I want to or not. So just, she paused, surprised by her own words. Just try not to get hit in the face. Carlos stared at her. Something in those dark eyes was moving, shifting, like water beneath ice. You're unexpected, he said. So I've been told. I don't mean it as a criticism. I know, she said. And she did. She went back to her other tables. She did not notice Marco outside in the SUV, speaking quietly into his phone, his eyes moving between Carlos through the glass and a black car that had pulled up on the opposite side of the street. She did not notice the man inside that car taking photographs. The photographs appeared 3 days later.
Sophia was tagged in a post on an Instagram account she didn't follow. Someone named @MiamiUnderworld, an anonymous account with 200,000 followers that specialized in gossip about Miami's criminal underworld. The post showed a photo of her and Carlos through Rose's window, their heads tilted toward each other across the table. She was handing him the ice pack. The caption read, Carlos Vega has a new pet. Wonder what she knows. Sophia read it 3 times. Then she Googled Carlos Vega. The results took her breath away. Not because of the legitimate side, the hotels, the business empire, the philanthropic foundation that had funded 2 community centers and a youth boxing program in Overtown. That part was impressive, but not alarming. It was the other results, the ones that didn't name him directly, but danced around him. The federal investigations that had been closed without charges 3 times in 8 years. The organized crime reporter who had written a profile titled The Ghost of Brickell that described an unnamed Colombian businessman in terms that made Sophia's hands go cold.
And then there was the Wikipedia page for the Vega organization, which was not a page about import logistics. She put her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She picked it up again. She called Carlos. He answered on the first ring. "Sophia, I Googled you," she said. Silence. "I need you to tell me," she said, "that it isn't true." Another silence. Longer. The kind that was its own answer. "I think," Carlos said carefully, "you should let me come to you."
No, tell me right now, on the phone, are you... She stopped. The word felt enormous. Are you what they're saying you are? What are they saying? That you run half of Miami's underworld, that you're untouchable, that 3 federal investigations couldn't pin anything on you because the witnesses, her voice faltered, because the witnesses changed their minds. Quiet. Carlos. Yes, he said, very low, very quiet. Some of it is true. She hung up. She didn't go to Rosa's for 2 days. She told her manager she had a stomach bug and sat in her apartment and thought about what she knew and what she felt and whether those 2 things could coexist. On the second night, someone knocked on her door at 9 p.m. She looked through the peephole. A woman, mid-50s, dark hair pulled back severely, elegant in the way of someone who had been powerful for so long they no longer needed to perform it. She was alone. Sophia opened the door to the chain. "My name is Elena Vega," the woman said. "Carlos's mother. He doesn't know I'm here." She paused. "May I come in?" Sophia let her in. She made coffee, because it was the only thing she knew how to do with unexpected guests. Elena sat at the small kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug and said, "He told me about you 3 weeks ago. He didn't mean to. It slipped out." She said this with the air of someone reporting a miracle. Carlos does not let things slip. Sophia sat across from her. "What did he tell you?" "That he met a woman who wasn't afraid of him." Elena looked at her directly. "Do you know how rare that is?" "I didn't know who he was." "You know now." Sophia was quiet.
"I'm not here to convince you of anything," Elena said. "I'm not going to tell you he's a good man hiding under bad circumstances, because it's more complicated than that, and you seem smart enough to know when you're being managed." She set down the mug. "I'm here because my son has not looked at another person, really looked, in 4 years, and I have been watching him turn to stone for 4 years. And then he mentioned your name, and he looked like himself again for 30 seconds. She stood. "I thought you should know that." After Elena left, Sophia sat alone in her kitchen for a long time. She thought about a man sitting on a sidewalk who hadn't flinched when someone threatened to humiliate him. She thought about eyes that watched everything. She thought about a car that appeared before she asked for it, and a note that said dignity, and a smile that happened so rarely it felt like weather. She thought about everything she read. She thought about what she knew about herself, that she had spent her whole life choosing the right thing over the easy thing, and that she wasn't sure anymore which one this was. She picked up her phone. She typed, "I'm not saying I understand. I'm not saying I'm okay with it, but I'm not done talking to you either. So come to Rose's tomorrow." She hit send before she could stop herself. His reply came in under a minute. "I'll be there at 8. He was there at 7:45. She arrived to find him already at table 7 with 2 coffees and a plate of eggs he'd apparently convinced Rose's cook, a 60-year-old Cuban man named Hector, who was famously unsentimental, to prepare before opening. Hector was, when Sophia came through the back, inexplicably in a good mood.
She sat down across from Carlos without preamble. He looked at her the way he always did, like she was a fact he was still working out the implications of. "Before you say anything," she said, "I need you to understand something about me. I have worked for bad people before. I grew up around people who did bad things. I understand that the world has layers and not everything is clean." She paused. "But I don't lie to people. I don't let people lie to me. Not even people She stopped, chose a different word. "Not even people I care about." "I didn't lie to you," Carlos said. "You let me not know." "Yes, that's the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're right." She blinked. She hadn't expected that. "You're right," he said again, slower, like he was putting the words somewhere they'd stay. "I let you not know because knowing would have ended this, and I didn't want this to end." He looked down at his coffee. That was selfish. Sophia studied his face. The split lip had healed. There was a faint scar through his left eyebrow she hadn't noticed before. Old, from a long time ago. "What is this?" she asked. He looked up. "What do you think this is?" she said. "Between us, Carlos Vega, who had stared down federal investigators, who had negotiated with men who made other men disappear, who had built an empire from nothing at an age when most people were still figuring out what they wanted. Carlos Vega looked at Sophia Miller and said nothing for so long that the silence became its own kind of answer. "I don't know," he finally said. "I've never been here before." She picked up her coffee. "Neither have I."
They sat with that for a moment. "Tell me something true," she said. He considered. "I sleep 4 hours a night. I've tried for years to sleep more, and I can't. I built the youth center in Overtown because I grew up in a place like that neighborhood, and someone helped me when I was 12, and I never found a way to repay them." Another pause. "I kept your $20 bill." She felt something crack open in her chest. "That's not an investment strategy." "No," he said. "It isn't." It was another 3 weeks before he kissed her. 3 weeks of coffee and conversations that went long past her shift, of Felix driving her home, and Carlos appearing at the end of those drives more and more often, of slow walks through the neighborhood, because he said he liked walking, and she suspected he liked having somewhere to be that wasn't a boardroom or a negotiation. She learned things about him in pieces, the way you learn about a city, one street at a time. He had a younger sister named Isabella, who was studying medicine in Bogota, and who he sent money to without telling their mother because Elena would argue about the amount. He could cook exactly 2 things well: the rice dish his grandmother had made and a very specific style of scrambled eggs that he prepared with a focus that made Sophia unreasonably happy to watch. He read 3 books at once and rotated between them depending on his mood. He had never once, in 12 years of immense wealth, bought anything for himself that he considered frivolous, except for a first edition copy of a Pablo Neruda collection that sat on his desk and that he refused to explain. She told him things too, about her mother, who had raised her alone and worked double shifts herself and never complained, who had died of a heart attack at 53, while Sophia was working a Saturday night at her 3rd waitressing job, about James, her brother, who had left Miami at 22 and never really come back, not in the way that counted. About the version of herself she'd had to build from scratch after her mother died, quieter than the person she'd been before, but steadier. "You're not quieter," Carlos said one evening. They were sitting on the steps outside her building, the city humming its nighttime hum around them. "You're just selective." She turned to look at him. "Is there a difference?" "Quieter people shut down. You just choose." He looked at her. "You chose to say something that morning outside the diner when it would have been easier not to." She held his gaze. "So did you, when you told me the truth on the phone." He didn't answer, but his hand, which had been resting on the step between them, moved slightly until his fingers were just touching hers. She didn't move her hand away. He didn't look at their hands. Neither did she. But neither of them moved. And that was how it started, not with a declaration or a dramatic moment, but with 2 people deciding not to move their hands. 3 days later, everything fell apart. Sophia arrived at Rose's to find a man she didn't recognize sitting at table 7, a heavy-set man with a gold ring on every finger and an expression like he'd been born disappointed. He looked at her the way certain men looked at women who worked in places like this, and Sophia had perfected the look she gave back that communicated, without words, that he should recalibrate. He handed her a folded note before she could speak. "Walk away from Carlos Vega. This is the only time you'll be asked nicely." She put the note in her apron. She poured the man coffee from the pot she was holding without letting her hand shake. "Anything else?" she asked. He stared at her. "You don't seem scared."
"I'm at work," she said. "Was there something else?" She went to the back and photographed the note and sent it to Carlos. His reply was 3 words: "Don't go home." The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. She went through the motions of her shift. Table 4 needed more water. Table 9 wanted to split the check 8 ways, which she found she could do in her head without thinking, which was how she knew she was running on autopilot. Felix appeared at the entrance at 11. He caught her eye and gave a small nod. Carlos had sent him. The heavy-set man was gone. But when Sophia went to the back to get her jacket at the end of her shift, Hector told her that a woman had come in through the kitchen entrance 20 minutes ago and asked which one was Sophia. "What did she look like?" Sophia asked. "Young, maybe 20, dark hair, looked scared." Sophia looked at Hector. "What did you tell her?"
I said I didn't know any Sophia. He crossed his arms. I don't like men in gold rings sending notes to my staff. Sophia hugged him before she could stop herself. He made the sound of a man who hadn't been hugged in a decade and wasn't sure how to handle it. The young woman was waiting outside the back entrance. She was leaning against the wall with her arms wrapped around herself, and she did look scared. The kind of scare that had been going on for a long time and had calcified into something that looked like calm from a distance. I'm Sophia, Sophia said. The woman looked up. She had dark eyes, Carlos's dark eyes, and Sophia's stomach turned over slowly. I'm Isabella, the woman said, Carlos's sister. Sophia stared. You're supposed to be in Bogota.
I came back 2 days ago. I didn't tell Carlos. Isabella's voice was controlled, but her hands were shaking, because I knew if he found out why, She stopped. He'd handle it his way, and I don't want him to handle it his way. Not this time. What happened? Isabella looked up and down the alley. Then she said, very quietly, a man named Rafael Montoya has been following me for 6 weeks. He knows Carlos. He's been asking me things about Carlos's routes, his schedules, Okay, Sophia said. Her voice was even. Her heart was hammering. Okay, come inside. Carlos arrived at Rosa's in 18 minutes, which meant he had driven fast and told Marco to hold any calls that weren't emergencies, while also determining that this was an emergency, all in the span of a single text. He walked in and saw his sister and went very still. Bella, he said. That was all. Isabella stood up. She said something to him in Spanish, fast and urgent, and his face did something Sophia had never seen it do. It cracked, just for a second. A brother, and not a boss. A person, and not a force. Then it closed again. He turned to Sophia. You stayed with her, he said. Of course I stayed with her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. What happened next took 48 hours, and involved things Sophia was not present for and did not ask about directly. What she knew was that Isabella was moved to a safe location. What she knew was that Carlos did not sleep during those 48 hours at all. What she knew was that on the second night, at 2 in the morning, he appeared at her door, not to ask for anything, just standing there in his jacket, with shadows under his eyes, looking like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time.
She opened the door wider, and he came inside and sat on her small couch, and she made coffee they both knew he didn't need, and they sat in the kitchen light, talking until 4 a.m., not about Montoya, not about what had happened, but about small things. The Neruda book, a restaurant in Cartagena his grandmother used to take him to as a child, whether Sophia preferred early mornings or late nights. Both, she said, depending on what she was running toward. At some point, he fell asleep on her couch. She put a blanket over him and sat in the chair across from him and watched him sleep, the way you watch something rare and fragile that doesn't know it's being watched. He looked asleep, like someone who had never built a wall in his life. She thought, I'm in trouble. She was absolutely in trouble. The plot twist, when it came, didn't come from Montoya. It came from Deja. Deja, who had worked at Rosa's for 6 years and knew everything about everyone, pulled Sophia aside 3 days after Carlos fell asleep on her couch and said with the expression of someone delivering bad news they'd been sitting on for too long, I have to tell you something. She told Sophia that her ex-boyfriend, a man named Troy who Sophia had broken up with 14 months ago and not about much sense, had been talking to a reporter, a crime reporter, the kind who wrote stories about the Vega organization. He's been feeding him information about you and Carlos, Deja said. I heard it from my cousin who knows his roommate. She paused. He said, Sophia, he said you're working for Carlos, like working for him on purpose, feeding him information about customers. Sophia went very still. That's not true, she said. I know it's not true. He's going to publish this? Deja's silence was its own answer. The story ran online that evening. Sophia found out when 3 people texted her the link at the same time.
The headline was, Vega's new inside source, a Rosa's Cafe waitress, and a suspicious relationship. There was no proof. There was nothing that could constitute proof, because there was nothing to prove. But the photographs, The same ones from the Instagram account, plus new ones she hadn't seen, painted a story that was coherent enough to feel real. Her phone rang. Carlos. "I saw it," she said when she picked up. "It's Troy Anderson," he said. "I know. How do you know his name?" "I had my people look into anyone close to you when—" He stopped. Sophia felt something cold settle over her. "When you had your people look into me," she said quietly. "When you made the file." Silence. "There's a file about me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sophia, how long have you known about Troy?" "Since—" He paused. "Since the beginning." She put the phone down. She didn't hang up, just set it on the counter, and walked to the window, and stood there for a moment looking at the street below, the perfectly normal street, with its perfectly normal evening, and the completely unremarkable fact that her life was on fire. She picked the phone back up. "You investigated me before you knew me?" "Yes." "You ran a background check on a waitress who gave you $20? "Yes." "And you never told me?" "No." She breathed. In. Out. "I need a day. Sophia, I know what I said," she said, "about not being done talking to you. That's still true. But I need a day." He said, "Okay." She believed him. She wasn't sure why, but she did.
She spent the day at her mother's grave, which was what she did when she needed to think and couldn't talk to anyone alive. She sat on the ground next to the headstone with her knees pulled up and worked through every feeling she had in the quiet, methodical way her mother had taught her, not suppressing them, just sorting them. She was angry about the file. That was real, and it was fair. She was embarrassed about the article. That was also real, though less important. And underneath both of those things, deeper and more inconvenient than either, was the fact that she had not, in a day of sitting with her thoughts, stopped caring about Carlos Vega, not for a single minute, and that told her something. She drove back, Felix still appearing with quiet reliability every time she needed to go somewhere, took her without asking questions, and called Carlos from the car. "The file," she said. "I need you to tell me what's in it." "Everything in it I could have learned from a conversation," he said. Carlos, tell me what's in it." He told her. All of it. The job history, the apartment, her brother, the disorderly conduct charge. All of it. "You looked me up," she said, "and then you came back to the cafe." "Yes." "Why?" A pause she recognized now, the one he took when he was deciding how honest to be with himself. "Because the file told me facts," he said, "and facts were not enough. I needed to—" He stopped, started again. "I needed to see you." She was quiet for a moment. "The article is going to cause problems for you," she said finally. "The article can be managed. What about Troy?" A very brief silence. "Troy Anderson will not be a problem."
Something in his voice made her close her eyes. "Carlos, he'll be unharmed," he said firmly. "I don't hurt people who are inconvenient, only people who are dangerous." She exhaled slowly. "I need you to promise me that." "I promise you that." "Okay." She opened her eyes. Outside the window, Miami was doing what it did in the evenings, going golden and loud and relentless. "I'm coming to you." The penthouse of Vega Tower did not look like what Sophia had imagined. She had imagined something cold, chrome and glass, and the kind of minimalism that was about emptiness rather than simplicity. Instead, it was warm, dark wood, walls of books, a kitchen that looked used, Neruda on the desk, open, a jacket thrown over a chair. On one wall, a photograph, black and white, slightly off-center, of a street she didn't recognize, somewhere tropical, with children playing in the background. Carlos was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows when she arrived, the city spread out below him like something he was responsible for, which she supposed he was, in ways that were legal and ways that weren't. He turned when she came in. She crossed the room and stood in front of him and looked up at him. He was taller than she'd realized, or maybe she'd always known and never stood this close, and said, "You're infuriating. I know. You're secretive and you're controlling and you have a file on me
And you let me walk around not knowing who you were for weeks. Yes, and I have no business being here. No, he agreed. You probably don't. But I'm here, she said. You're here, he said.
He reached up and pushed a strand of hair away from her face with 2 fingers, so carefully it felt like a question, and she answered it by not moving, by tilting her face up the fraction of an inch that meant yes, and he kissed her with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything, not rushed, not tentative, just certain, the kind of kiss that had thought about itself for weeks. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead against his jaw and felt him breathe. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "Everything worth having is complicated. I need you to be honest with me, always, even when you think the honest thing is going to scare me off. It will be the hardest thing I've ever done," he said. "But yes." She pulled back and looked at him. "Then we'll figure out the rest." The rest took time. More time than either of them expected, and not in a clean, straight line. There was the Montoya situation, which resolved in a way Sophia chose not to ask for the full details of, except to confirm twice that no one was killed, which Carlos confirmed each time without flinching, because he understood that this was the line she needed and he was going to hold it. There was Isabella, who came back to Miami 3 months later, not to hide, but to finish her medical degree at the University of Miami, which Carlos arranged with a speed that suggested he had been waiting for her to ask for years. Isabella and Sophia became something Sophia hadn't had in a long time, a friend who told her the truth, even about Carlos, especially about Carlos. "He bought a houseplant last week," Isabella told Sophia once, with the gravity of someone reporting a news event. "He's never had a houseplant. He killed an orchid once and didn't speak about it for a week. I'm choosing to interpret this as growth." There was Elena, who came to dinner at the penthouse twice and watched Sophia the way mothers watch the people their children bring home, cataloging and assessing and landing by the end of the second dinner on an expression that Sophia recognized as something like relief.
There was the night 6 months in when Carlos came home from a negotiation that had gone badly and sat in the kitchen with both hands flat on the table and said quietly, "I don't want to do this forever." Sophia looked at him from across the table. "Which part?" "The part that requires me to be something you have to accept instead of something you can be proud of." She sat down. She thought about what to say for a long time. "You built 2 community centers and a boxing program," she finally said. "You kept your sister in school. You keep your legal empire completely clean. Those things are real. The other things are also real." "I know." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "But people are the whole of them, not just one part." He turned his hand over under hers. "What would it look like," she said carefully, "to start pulling back from the other things? Not all at once, not in a way that makes you vulnerable, but over time." He looked at her. "You've thought about this." "I think about a lot of things when Felix drives me home." Something moved in his eyes, slow, like dawn. "It would take years," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." He squeezed her hand, just once. But the way he did it said everything he still hadn't learned to say in words. And Sophia, who had learned to read his silences the way she'd learned to read her tables, understood every single word of it. A year after she'd handed a homeless man her last $20 outside a diner on a Tuesday morning, Sophia Miller stood in a hotel ballroom, one of Carlos's legitimate hotels, marble floors and high ceilings, and the warm hum of a fundraising gala for the youth center, in a dress she had not chosen alone, and heels that fit, because Carlos had, without announcing it, quietly learned her size.
He found her by the window, looking out at the city that was his and wasn't his, and was slowly, incrementally, becoming something he was building differently. "You look like you're thinking," he said. "I'm always thinking." "About what?" She looked at him. He was in a dark suit, no tie, and he looked like what he was, powerful, private, capable of great patience and great severity. But he was also looking at her the way he had been looking at her for a year, like she was the only fact in the room worth working out the implications of, about Tuesday mornings.
she said, and broken heels, and $20 bills. He reached into his jacket pocket and held something out to her. It was the $20 bill, soft at the edges, worn through from being folded and unfolded. He had kept it for a year. She looked at it, then at him. "Give that back to me properly," she said, "and I'll buy you breakfast." "I'll take the breakfast," he said, "if it comes with you." She took the bill from his fingers, held it in her palm, felt the whole impossible year of it, the bucket of mop water, and the dark eyes, and the files, and the fear, and the honesty, and the slowly, stubbornly built thing between them that had turned out to be exactly what it looked like. "It does," she said. He offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked back into the room together. Not a homeless man and a waitress, not a mafia boss and a liability, not a secret or a scandal or a complication, just two people who had seen each other clearly, in the fullest sense, and decided that was enough. That was everything.